Hello everyone, this is week 5 of Digital 3D Studio. We're going to be finishing up Intro to Materials today with some more specialized materials like skin, metals, and glass. And then I'll do a very quick intro to UV unwrapping, which we'll be doing on our spoon. So if you have attempted to put a texture on your spoon and the wood grain isn't looking correctly, UV unwrapping is what's going to solve that issue. So let's open up our scene. So we want to make sure we're in our shading workspace. Our material previewer is open, and I'm just going to play around with the material on my bear just to show you the different options of everything. But you may want to have specific objects that you're working on while you follow along. So I have my bear material, and last class we covered base color, specular, and then normals. And that's what I said would be like the 3 basic things on every material. But now we're going to go through this list of all these other options. So let's start off at the top where we have subsurface. So subsurface is, the way I explain it is just if you hold something up to a light and it looks like it's glowing inside, it has subsurface scattering. So your skin, even your cupcake's going to have it, wax. It's when light's entering the object, bouncing around, and then coming back out. So let's actually put some on so we can see what I mean. And usually a value of about 0.1 is going to be fine. If you do it too high, it's going to look like very glowy and like creepy jelly. Let's put like a skin color on this so it's not like creepy. So I just put a base color on them. My subsurface is at 0.1, and you might notice there's a subsurface color. So first I'm just going to put this at like something absurd. And this is where you might notice the subsurface value changing. So at 0, we see that full base color, but at full subsurface, so at 1, you see the entire subsurface color. Normally, you're just going to have the subsurface color be the exact same color as your base color. If you do have something where like the interior might be a different color, like maybe a grape, the like exterior is purple and the interior is more greenish, you might change this color up a little bit. But most cases you can just copy paste the colors, so hover over your base color, hit Control C, then go over that subsurface color and hit Control V. And then there are 3 more options that you might want to be playing around with for this, and that's the subsurface radius. So this is breaking down the light rays of that subsurface into red, blue, and green. And these are the values that change, like how much they bounce around, I guess. Usually you're going to want your red one a little bit higher for something like skin. But you'll just have to play around to like see what effect they're having. So this is the bear with subsurface on. This is him without it. So you can see he's a little bit flatter, and when I have the subsurface on, it gives him a little bit more like gumminess. So actually, we're all going to want it. It's on most food items. So if you have a fruit in your scene, like a strawberry, it's going to have subsurface. Our cupcake's going to have a little bit of subsurface. So let's go ahead and just, I'm going to put it at 0.1. That's usually my go-to. You might want more or less. And then I can do Control C, Control V for that color. Just because it is going to be letting light inside of it, bouncing it around and letting it out. And again, if you're totally not sure if it has subsurface, just like find a real cupcake hold it up to a light and see if it kind of like glows around the edges. So that's subsurface. So again, flesh, food items. I have a candle here, so I'd put it on my candle to make wax. But now let's turn it off on our bear. We don't want creepy flesh bear. So now let's do metallic. So the metallic slider is just going to be actually how metallic it is. And then base color is going to determine the color of that metal. So if you want like a more dull metal, you might not have it fully at 1, but you can also work in tandem with your specular roughness to either make it more reflective or a little bit more like scuffed up. And when you're doing metal, like for very basic items, you could just use the slider, but that website I showed, open, CC0, it will have some metal, some cool metals with like scuffs on it and like scratches that are going to look a lot more realistic in your scene. So I'd encourage you download one of these that looks similar to what you're going for. And then you're going to have like all of the same maps you're plugging in, but in this case you're also going to have a metalness map. And that'll work the same as if you're plugging in like the roughness or the color map. What are we? Blender. So metalness, metallic, pretty self-explanatory. I would encourage you bringing in maps to give it a little bit more detail. And then specular tint is where, metalness is where specular tint can come into play because it's not just going to be white light reflecting off of it, it will be a tint. I think there are ways you can like Google different metals and seeing what color is actually reflected off of it if you want to be very specific. I'm going to skip over anisotropic. This is basically like if you had a Pepsi can. Normally with the shading, it would have like light highlighting the edges. Anisotropic gives more direction and like angles to the lighting. So most cases we're not going to have to deal with that. It's more like, again, directional highlights rather than this glow that's happening on most of our objects. Then we have sheen. So actually I'm going to click on my backdrop fabric. Sheen is like a little peach fuzz effect. So again, oh, I should have left it as fleshy bear, but it'll give like that small little film of hair to like skin or peach or fabric. So you can see when I put that up to 1 compared to 0, it makes it a little bit softer looking because it's reflecting light just at its surface. So if you want your backdrop to look a little bit softer, you might put sheen on it. And then sheen tint is similar to specular tint, where if you want it to deal with light a little bit differently in terms of color. Clear coat, let's click on my cupcake. So clear coat is basically like putting a varnish on something, and there's a few options for clear coat. But if I just put this at 1 on my cupcake, you can see it looks like I just like wrapped it with like a plastic. And clear coat is going to reflect light separately from how the object's reflecting light. So you can still see like the normal map reflecting light with our specular roughness. Our clear coat has its own roughness. And it also actually, if you scroll down, has its own normal map. So if you wanted like a textured varnish on top of something, you might put clear coat on it. I'm like trying to think of, if you have like a bubble, like a water bubble, you might put clear coat. or if you just want to varnish your cupcake. IOR, index of refraction, if any of you saw, I did post a website that links the value. This is pretty much like, it's going to sound like specular, but it's how light is reflecting off an object. You can calculate specular from IOR, but if you want to be very specific with your objects, I did link this website. And if you just literally just type in this number that it gives you, since we are using a PBR material based in reality, our real measurements of IOR, index of refraction, is going to realistically convey that material. What now? Okay, so transmission. This one's the tricky one. So let's put it on my vase. So for transmission, mostly you'll be using this for glass, but if you have anything that has a transparency to it, so if you have a fabric that's kind of see-through, sometimes when I do wax, I'll put a little bit of transmission on it, but this is going to let light pass through it. So again, don't restrict your thinking just to glass, because I mean, glass is obvious, it's letting you to look through it, but there are other materials. I don't have anything like near me right now. I'm like looking around. But anything that's going to let light through it has transmission. So like piece of paper would have some. So let's just slide this all the way up to 1. And you can kind of see it looks like a frosted glassy effect, but it's not letting us see through the glass. And then at first I thought, I was like, oh, it's because the roughness is up high, because this is how you could do a frosted glass effect, is handling your specular roughness and the transmission roughness in tandem. But even if you put that down to 0, now it's just like very reflective of that image that's lighting our scene, but it's still not letting you look through the glass. So if this is happening for you, this is just because of the renderer we're using. So we'll go into the renderers more in depth next class, but this little like camera icon, render properties, is going to list your different renders you can work with. So right now we've been working in Eevee. I think I introduced that last class, but there is also cycles, which I think I have to be in this. Okay. So I'm in my render view. This is render view with Eevee. This is render view with cycles. So you can see cycles, I can actually see through my glass. And the reason that we can't see through the glass in Eevee is because Eevee doesn't have ray tracing, which basically is how our light rays are bouncing around the scene. So Eevee does save power, just sees how it's bouncing off the object, but it's not really following the light any further. So once our rays touch our glass, Eevee isn't registering what it's doing from there. But there are 2 settings we can change to keep working with Eevee in our material preview, just because it'll save most of your computers, I'm assuming. If any of you did experiment with going into cycles, hopefully you didn't like crash or anything, but it is going to use a lot more brain power. So we usually save that just for our final render. So to actually make this see-through, to see how it's looking, there are 2 different areas we want to play around with. So one is going to be under the render properties. So again, that's that little like white camera back icon. You're going to hit screen space reflections, screen space reflections, and then hit refraction. So that's two things we had to change. Check mark screen space reflections, check mark refraction, and then you might notice nothing, absolutely nothing happened, and that's because we have to change the material properties itself. So if we go back to our little red globe for our glass, our vase, and then scroll down to settings, and this is where I pretend I remember, oh yes, and then under settings we have screen space refraction. So if you click this, what is going on? You can see we can see through it now. So once you have it turned on, to make it look a little bit more accurate, you might have to alter the refraction depth. So again, my go-to for everything is 0.1, but you might need to play around with it. So this is like very clear glass. It's not really warping anything at all. But this will at least let you preview it while you're working in Eevee. I want it a little bit. Did I already? Oh, I did that one. 0.01. What about 0.0? Nope, too far. So this is like how far into your object it's doing like refraction of light. So that's what I'm changing right now to try to get a desirable effect. So I do want the glass to like kind of skew my objects, but not too much. If you had a completely solid object that you put this glass material on, it is going to be distorting the objects behind it a lot more, which is realistic. But if you have like a thin glass, you'll usually be able to see through it pretty easily and not have too much refraction happening. So again, to actually see the glass working while working in Eevee, we had to change three things. One was in our material properties under settings. We turned on screen space refraction. We can alter our refraction depth then, which is going to say like what depth of hitting into that glass it's going to be bouncing light back off or through. And then we also had to go into our render settings. Near the top of that right section of options, we had to check mark screen space reflections and check mark refraction. And then you should be able to see through your transmissive objects. Okay, so once we have that actually working, we can then go and play with roughness. We can play with specular roughness and make like a frosted glass effect. You can also alter the color with your base color if you wanted a colored glass. It's just a matter of getting those like settings set up so that we can actually see the effects while we're working. So that's it for glass. So again, I put the transmission up to 1. If I was doing like a fabric, I might not put it fully at 1. Maybe I'd do like, why is it staying at 1? That's weird. I might do like 0.2 or something. And now I'll just show you guys what emission does. And I think I've mentioned alpha before, but emission, make another material, is going to give your object the illusion that it's emitting light. So right now at black, it's going to not be looking glowy or anything, but if you just go and click on that, shoot it up to 1, you can see that our object kind of has like a brightness to it. So the one thing about this is it's not actually emitting light. It's just going to, in your render, like look bright compared to everything else, but it's not emitting light. So if you are doing an emissive material, you're going to have to work with both the material and your lighting setup to give it an effect that it's actually like lighting up this candle. So if I was doing my flame, I might give this a little like yellowish coloring to it. And then I'll cover this next class, but then I would bring a light in, put it right here, right overlapping that flame to make it look like it's actually affecting the other objects with light. So that's emission. You put it on just so the object looks glowy. It's not actually going to light up your scene, but it'll give you that glowy effect. And then alpha, let me bring up an alpha map. So alpha would be you importing an image like we've done, and it's going to be a black and white map where black signifies see-through, like totally transparent, and white is going to signify opaque. So there will be cases where if you're doing like a small like mesh, like a metal mesh where there's little holes in it, you could put an alpha map on where it's just black and white. The black is the holes, the white is the solid part, and if you put that on, it'll give your mesh the illusion that there are cutouts in it without you having to do booleans. So that's going to come up more on like individual personal basis, but it will just be a matter of you pulling in an image and connecting it like we had been when we imported like our fabric material. So that's all for the settings. That was just a really quick explanation of them. How you apply them is going to depend on which objects you have in your scene, but as long as you know what the sliders do, you should be able to get them on. So the second part of this class, I want to go over UV unwrapping, which is going to be a little bit more difficult for everyone. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to be working with the spoon. And first thing I did was I went to that CC0 website, and I found a wood texture that I liked. And actually, the one that I chose isn't going to look the best. I think I chose like this one. I think if I redid it, I would pick one with a larger grain. But again, sometimes the ones you download aren't going to look the best. It's just a matter of finding a good collection. So download some wood, extract that folder into where you have your collection of materials, and then let's create a material for our wood. So I'm going to kind of breeze past the connecting those maps part. If you are confused about that, I do have that one video that is more specifically about those connections, so it should just be the video that's like directly previous to this one in the playlist. But let's make our wood. And then we are going to find all of those maps, and then I always just pull everything in, and then I decide if I want it or not, because sometimes they give you stuff that you're not going to need. So we have color, need that, and that stays at that RGB, color to color, collapse it to get out of my way. I don't know if I'll use displacement for this, but roughness, non-color, connect color to roughness, collapse it, and then normal, non-color, shift A, brain fart, vector. Okay, normal map, normal to normal, color to color, and we have our basic setup. If I wanted to, I could mix in this displacement map. I did that last video, so if you do want that to add a little bit more roughness to the wood, you can, but I'm just going to delete mine. So, actually, wow, this laid all right. So the wood looks pretty all right. There are weird parts where it's like changing direction between the scoop and the edge right here. But if we look at our spoon, you can see it's like lengthwise grain that we want, and right now the one on our screen is going non-lengthwise. Very specific terms. So, I mean, technically we could bring in that mapping thing and try to figure that out if we wanted to. Actually, let me show you, because it didn't work for me, which is why we need to UV map. So I'm going to show you how poorly this does. So, oh, I just need to rotate it. But oink. What is this? Like, that looks horrible. So this is why I'm not doing the mapping thing. So I'm just going to disconnect that for now. And we're going to do a UV unwrap. So, changing workspaces. We're going to be in UV editing. We're super zoomed out for no reason. You can just do tilde, view selected. Oh, and it won't help us. Wow, wow. There we go. Oh my god, and I see my spoon's like cutting into my face and it's been annoying me. So, here on the left is the like space where our UV map will be laid out. You can see our normal maps laying in here right now, so it's a nice little reference. If I select my whole spoon, so on the right side, if I just hit A, you can see on the left side that it filled this up with nonsense. And if you go and click on this, so this has like the same tools as our viewport, where we can be face mode, edge mode, vertex mode. If I hit G, basic transformation, you can see I'm moving that face around, but I'm not actually moving anything on the actual object. So if I went in here and hit G, it's moving it around. But if I hit G over here, it's only moving how, ooh, I should have material preview on. Oh, and if your screen is doing this, where it makes your spoon disappear, we hit N, we go to view, and we reduce our clip size. Blend as big. So we can actually see, focus on that highlighted square. So you can see it's moving around where the actual like material's laying on your spoon. So you can use the basic transformation tools, but it's more moving like where it's laying on your picture instead of the actual object. So the unwrap, Blender's like automatic unwrap is a total mess. So first thing we're going to do is make it make sense, because you can kind of see like if I click on different parts over here, you can see that it's like selecting things over here, but it's nonsense. It's nonsense. So we're going to actually go in and tell Blender how we want it to cut it. So I'm going to be working in edge mode, and I'm going to go to notable spots where I want a cut to happen. So right now this entire mesh is like all sewn together, and I need to find strategic spots to cut it so that I can just flatten it. So again, like a sewing pattern. So if I like took all the pieces of this bear apart, like this nice curved piece would just be like a flat oval, and the head pieces would all be like these weird little like leafies. It's stitches. Stitches. So, we're going to be making a sewing pattern for our spoon. The easiest one that we're going to go to is just like the little boolean hole we have up there, because we're not going to see inside of there, so may as well make a stitch or a seam. Again, if you're having that issue where it's not letting you zoom, you can do that view selected. So I'm just going to select that whole loop and make sure I remember my hotkeys. So we have 2 new hotkeys today. Maybe 3. No, only 2. So to give us options for our edge mode, our edge selection, we're going to hit Control E. Oh my god, my mouse is just hovering over what we want. Look at us. Great day. So we want to mark our seam. Once you do that, it's going to have a little highlight effect. Beautiful. So nothing's changing with our map. We're just marking up where we want that unwrap to happen. So we're not actually unwrapping it. We're just marking where cuts will be happening. So again, Control E. Oh my gosh, my mouse is lining up so perfectly. And then mark seam. The spoon's a little awkward. It would be nice if we can just make a seam on the scoop part, but we kind of want that wood grain to continue. So where we're marking seams is where there's going to be an interruption with our pattern. So ideally we want this whole wood pattern to be continuous that whole way down, but because we made this out of this is a cylinder that we made it out of, there will be a point where we have to just chop it lengthwise, and there will be a seam there, but that's where you just strategically point it away from the camera. So I think for now, I mean, technically we can probably cut this in half to the front be a piece and the back be a piece. So I'm gonna chop my spoon in half. And hopefully my loop cut will just work because of our clean mesh. So I just did Control left click. I don't like my metallic bear. I should have left him with skin. So if we just loop that the whole way around, if you are having a side part be visible to your final render though, you might want to kind of go under your spoon or the side that's not going to be visible. And then again, Control E, mark seam. So now we're actually going to map this out. So right now it's still that mess. God, I can't say these words together. But now we're going to tell Blender to redo its work, and hopefully it will improve. So let's hit U, and let's hit Unwrap. And what is this? What did it do? So you can see, actually, we have a spoon, but it's really skinny. Don't mind me, I'm gonna do something. Okay. So really, really skinny. If you do need yours thicker, you can scale this up with my brain along X. And now you can see, oh my gosh, it looks like we have a spoon. So if you click on different parts. Those are our faces in there. Is this what it's gonna like let me? Yeah, okay. So if you want to see like what you're selecting from your UV to be reflected in your mesh, if you hit this button, then that very top left of your UV mapping area, it says UV sync selection, and this will like let you see like specific parts of your mesh that you were clicking at. So we have it cut out. You can see, actually not really too well, but where our seams are, it's going from here to down here. So there is going to be an inconsistency. There is going to be a seam there. If you wanted to line that up better, you can go in, unmark that. Actually, I want to see what happens if I do that. This is just an experiment, personal experiment. Oh, what did it do? So you can see now it's connecting these like two meshes right at that seam. So that's what happened if you leave them connected. So depending on what object you need to do this in is going to alter how your UV map is going to work, but as long as you're mindful of where you can have seams, if you have like a circular cylindrical object, there will have to be like an obvious seam on it where it's just like cutting it in half so you can unwrap it. If you have something like a box, it's going to be a lot easier because you'll have like straight edges and corners that you can use to like fold out from each other. But once we have this unwrapped, for our spoon, we just have to rotate this. Whoa. And you can see it rotates. It rotated our texture on there. And you can see that's where our seam is. If you still see like any parts of your object that are stretching or pressing that material, you can go in and like work with the mesh itself, but at the level we're at, oh, I still have it. Oh, I have this unmarked, sorry. Just for this first project, you should be able to get by just by doing a very simple unwrap. So again, we just went in with our edge mode. We hit Control E, we marked some seams, then we hit U, or then we had to select everything. I don't know if I ever said that. Select everything, then hit U. And then when you unwrap, it'll map it out. If you have trouble seeing it, if it's smushed down like that first time, I just stretched it out. What is this doing? Oh, so see, right here, that's my little cylinder in here. So it's trying to, let me go into face. It has all of these faces connected, so it's really small on one side and large on the other. So to make this not distort the material so much, I need to grab one of those seams, mark it. Oh my god, and I like sabotaged my mesh. And now, if I hit A, and then do U, and then unwrap. If I remember my hotkeys. Now you can see that part that was like gross is now like a nice flattened area. So we have it nicely mapped out. If you do want to play around with, why isn't it letting me? Oh, face mode. If you do want to play around with how these are laying on your map, you can go in and select specific parts of your mesh. So these are called like islands, the different pieces that are independent from each other. If you're in face mode in your UV editor and you hit L over one of those islands, you'll grab that whole island and you can move it around. So if you wanted like these two spoon parts facing the same way, we can grab that and have them so that they're going the same with our texture. So that's just a very, very brief rundown of UV maps. How complicated it's going to be depends on your material or your object, but for now we hopefully don't have that too complicated of materials that will need this to be done. But whenever you have a more complicated mesh, or that the imported material isn't laying correctly, you can go in, map it out, and then you can see now we have that wood grain. Let's go back to our showing up correctly. So that's all for materials, for just basics. That will give us a nice realistic looking scene. And once we finish up that, we're going to be going into lighting and rendering next class so that we can fully finish up this project. So I'll see you guys next time.